8:19. Mob rule is the way the Prime Minister describes what's happening in Britain at the moment. He says democracy is being subverted by violent and intimidatory protest and wants the police to use the law to act much more quickly. In a moment, we're hoping to speak to someone from Just Stop Oil, which pushes protests to the limit, I think it's fair to say. But first, let's hear from the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. He had his home targeted by pro-Palestinian protesters who projected slogans onto his house and chanted for several hours. Good morning.
Good morning to you.
Now, I've explained a little bit about what happened to you there, but for people who didn't follow this closely, how long were the protesters there for? Were you in the house? Were your family around? I mean, how did this make you feel?
We were warned by the police who said a big demonstration will take place outside of your house. You should not return home for your own safety. So we had to change our behaviour. I can't fault the police's actions that evening. They sent in the police vehicles to protect the driveway. They had armed response units around the corner. But the event, as I learnt from my neighbours and so forth, was very intimidating. It was very surprising to see for a small Dorset village. And it lasted 3.5 hours. And the rally itself wanted to agitate. They clearly wanted to be arrested. They were filming themselves. The police, I think, took the wise actions to monitor events, but to step back. And eventually, after 3.5 hours, the protesters actually dispersed. But it is wrong for any parliamentarian to be, I believe, intimidated in this way. And I should say that whilst mine was high profile, there are many other colleagues who are treated poorly, badly, with abuse, threats, intimidation, not least female MPs, on a regular basis. And this needs to be addressed. And no parliamentarian should be accepting this as part of their job.
Yeah, I want to come back to that point just on security, but just very briefly, it seems to me that you're suggesting that the police could have done more. They had the power, they could have intervened at an earlier stage. And although you obviously commend what they did later in the day, they were aware of a big protest and you did have to alter your behaviour. Do you think they were too hesitant in acting?
I'm not going to make a judgment on the operational. I was speaking to senior police officers throughout the evening. I asked that very question. Absolutely, it's the first question to pose. Why not move them on? It's because it probably would have inflamed the situation. You're dealing with 60 to 70 protesters. So work out the ratio of the number of police officers you would then require, the vehicles to then put them in, and so forth. And ultimately, they then need to be charged. And what are they being charged with? And that's the clarity that I think the Prime Minister is trying to explore now, is what is deemed as acceptable behaviour. Because what we're seeing is, and it isn't just pro-Palestinian marches, I think you're about to speak to somebody at Just Stop Oil, that would justify this sort of behaviour, this intimidation, which not only is affecting MPs today, we've got Mike Freer choosing to stand down because of his experience, but the next generation of parliamentarians. I've said many times on your programme and others, Britain's going through an increasingly difficult era of global insecurity. We've got a role to play. We want good parliamentarians to step forward, to participate in parliament and be part of our government. They won't do that if they feel that they could be intimidated in this way, if this is the way they'd be treated if they were elected. So it damages Britain as a whole. And that's the message that we need to recognise. How can we strike this careful balance between the ability to demonstrate and to get protest, get your message across, but not affecting the actual process of democracy itself? For the House of Commons, for the Speaker to change the motions on the order paper because of MPs, for fear of MP security, something is going very, very wrong there. And I should stress that the Prime Minister spoke about disruptive process. The right to protest is absolutely there, but it's when they become disruptive and on the regular drumbeat that we've actually seen in order to try and affect and intimidate MPs' behaviour.
So you agree that mob rule is now affecting democratic rule? It's taken over. Is that what you're saying? Seems to be what you're suggesting there.
No, I think you're being a bit inflammatory with your language there.
Well, I'm actually repeating the Prime Minister's language. That's why I'm using that language. It's not mine, it's his.
Descending into mob rule and encouraging the police to stop disruptive protests. That places a little bit more clarity on this, rather than just saying Britain is now run by mob rule. Clearly, that would be a wrong description of where we are. We are seeing a change in behaviour. We are seeing protesting groups test the limits of what is responsible. In the same way that we saw, I never thought we'd have to legislate against walking over war memorials, because it's not something you'd ever expect society to want to do. We've had to do that because individual groups have no respect for the way things have perhaps been done in the past, and therefore we've had to legislate. And I'm sorry that we're now having this discussion about demonstrations. It's absolutely important to have that ability to demonstrate, but ultimately it should not be done at the cost, at the detriment to Parliament's ability to be able to debate matters.
Tobias Ellwood, thank you for joining us this morning. And we can speak now to Fiona Atkinson, who is from the protest group Just Stop Oil. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Great to have you with us. What Tobias was saying there at the very end about, it's fine to protest and obviously the people have the right to protest, but that standing outside somebody's house, affecting his and his family's behaviour, 60 to 70 people, that is just unacceptable. Do you agree with him?
Could I just start by saying that wasn't Just Stop Oil, and that when we did visit Keir Starmer's house, and I use the verb visit very intentionally there, and we visited one of Rishi Sunak's 5 homes, lucky him. What we did was we sang carols outside Keir Starmer's house, and we gathered outside Rishi Sunak's, and one of us who had created a very beautiful record, which was nearly #1 at Christmas, sang to him. So Just Stop Oil are a organisation.
Can I just take you back to the question that I asked you, though, which wasn't about your own actions. It was about whether or not it's ever right for somebody to stand outside an MP's home and protest.
Well, I'm going to speak Stop Oil, and what we've said we would do is we want to engage with MPs. We want to have dialogue with MPs. And we see some of this sort of protest as a symptom of the fact that politics has broken in this country. I mean, if politics wasn't broken in this country, we wouldn't have so many unhappy people. We've got poo in our rivers. We've got hardworking families without secure, safe homes of their own. So, this is a symptom of a society that doesn't feel protected by its politicians.
And I think a lot of people agree with you on that point, but I'm afraid I'm going to ask you again because I haven't had an answer. Do you think that it is right for protest groups to stand outside MPs' homes?
I think it is right to protest when you feel unsafe, when you feel threatened to politicians. And if they don't answer phone calls, if they don't deal with emails, Just Stop Oil have emailed politicians. We've had no reply as we move into this election campaign. We are profoundly disappointed in our politicians' response to the biggest threat to humanity. They're breaking their own rules on this. They're failing to protect us from climate breakdown. We've had one of the wettest Februaries in England ever. We've got crops drowning in our fields. We've got people unable to insure their homes because of the repetitive floods.
Can I just bring you back to...
I'm going to say that if in the end people cannot get that message through to their politicians, what are they supposed to do? You can't protest sitting at home.
Well, I think actually there are lots of things that people can do, and there are lots of ways to... Excuse me. No, please don't do that. There are lots of things that people can do. There are lots of ways to protest in a democracy. And for many people, they take advantage of them. They go on marches, they write letters, they campaign, they publicly protest, which is perfectly within the law. I think there is a problem, though, and many MPs are suggesting that they now feel they need private security because they are afraid and their families are afraid. And surely you must be able to understand, hearing from Tobias Ellwood there, who has directly experienced this, that standing outside the family home of a member of Parliament is not acceptable.
I don't think it's acceptable to sign off new gas and oil licenses when every scientist, every top climate scientist in the world is screaming at our politicians.
So you have no concerns at all about MPs who say that they fear for their lives?
Of course I do. I'm a human being. I'm a 68-year-old grandma with a 12-year-old granddaughter who I care about. I care about all children, all families everywhere. And if Tobias and the other politicians really engaged with the threat of climate crisis, do you know what? They wouldn't be sitting in their homes frightened of a few people who might come with a letter, which is what we're planning, by the way. They'd be out with us. They'd be using the biggest house, the Houses of Parliament. They'd be pushing to get change. They don't get it. They're not engaging with it. And also, can I just say, you don't get it? Presenters don't get it. Journalists don't get it. You would not be asking me this question with this tone in your voice of disapproval if you understood the threat that climate breakdown is to all of us. None of us are safe in our homes. So yes, I feel for Tobias, but we're not living in normal times. It was Chris Skidmore, who was the Tory chair of the Climate Committee, who said, we need to put everything to do with the climate crisis on a war footing.
Yes, and that was my interview on this very radio station. Fiona Atkinson from the protest group Just Stop Oil. Thank you so much for your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
That notion, she's invited to say that it's not acceptable, but her view is that the ends justify the means is the point on all of this. Loads of you getting in touch throughout about that, but also about assisted dying. I'm just going to read one before we move on to the news, because